Hey there, Mr. Bleeker here. I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how to make animated fire in Blender. Now I'm using Blender 2.78, the most modern version. But creating this fire tutorial works pretty much similar in each of the Blender models. We won't be using automated fire, we're going to make it from scratch. So I've included a stubby vase or brazier, whichever way you'd like to think of it, here. And our default scene has, of course, a camera lined up and just a point light source here. So I'll do a quick render. Zoom in a little bit so you can appreciate it. And there's a texture already applied to the cup, so you don't really have to worry about that, along with a nice blue universe behind. So what we want to do is create fire. So I am going to add a particle system, and we're going to put that inside of this, and it's going to emit particles. And as we work with them, it will start to look like fire. So if you haven't used a lot of Blender before, this might be a little advanced, but it's not horrendously difficult. This one's kind of fun. So I'm going to hit number 7 key and go into top view. And I kind of like to do this off to the side. Put our 3D cursor there. And I like to hit Shift A for add. That's the way I like to do this. To make objects. So there's our plane, a little big. So we'll scale it down. Probably not the last time I'll scale it. And right now in object mode, so hitting tab, I want to subdivide this one time. So over here, subdivide. You only really need to do that once. Okay, so a little 3D view there. You can sort of see where everything is in my scene. Zoom out a little bit. All right, so let's pull this over a bit. Now, what we want to do is we want to apply a system. So I'm going to say that I want particles. So give me a new particle system. There we go. Now, the particle system is ready to go. It comes with some default things. For example, from frame 1 to the end of the movie, how long those particles are going to survive, how long they may live. There's a bit of randomness to that. Now, when I do this tutorial, you can do it in a lot of different ways. You'll mess around with the particles and various things. But first thing first, before we get too far ahead, our movie down here is 250 frames. Oops, 250 frames. That's a little long. So I think what we'll do is we'll make this a 100 frame movie. Otherwise, it will never finish rendering. There we go. Now I'll zoom out again. And I'm going to tell my particles when they're emitted that, like actors, I want them on stage to begin with. So I'm going to tell them to show up 30 frames early. So set that to -30. I want the particles to last, well, about 35 frames. So I'm going to put that in there. And the particles, they're gonna go past the end of the movie a little bit. I just really like this setting. It works out pretty well for me. And we look at our particles. In Blender, one of the neat things you can do is you can hit Option A if you're on a Mac, or Alt A on a PC. Oops. And you have to be out of edit mode. Particles, there they are. Particles are only seen in object mode. So there's our particles raining down. Looks pretty good. And you'll see that the movie just keeps replaying until we stop it. So let's pause and rewind. The particles are falling because by default, there's gravity in the system. So one of the things that I do is I go down to these different options here. And I say, as far as options go, I need to adjust the weight. So in here, and I'll zoom in a little bit, you'll see that there are different field weights, things, how you could affect different forces that you're introducing in your particle system. Gravity right now is aimed down. So I'm going to level fun. And I'm going to, instead of aiming gravity down, I'm going to aim it up by saying -1.0. Now, zoom out and take a look at the result of that. If I hit Option A or Alt A, you see that the particles are going up. So I've just reversed gravity in this system. Kind of fun. So let's escape that. Okay, so we have our particles going which way we want now. Now it's a matter of messing around with them a little bit. By default, they're white. So if I go, let's go to this frame, and our camera won't see them because we're a little bit off to the side. So I'm going to hit grab, let's go like that. G for grab. Just see just enough of them. If I hit F12 and render, you'll see the particles coming off, and of course my blue universe in behind. So by default, they're white, but we can fix that. So let's go off the camera mode. Let's go back to our, I like to rotate this. There we go. Okay. And we'll start to apply some arguments. And arguments are just information about all of these little settings. Okay. We've been smart. We've shortened the length of our movie. Let's go back to frame 1. There we go. Try to stay on frame 1. You can advance here if you'd like, bit by bit, but I'm pretty happy to just manually adjust it here. Now, as far as our particles, they're following Newtonian physics rules, so gravity and things like that. And what we're going to do with them is we give our particles we'll give them a little bit of a slowdown. Let's make sure I have my gravity facing up. There we go. I want to introduce a little bit of velocity information. So as the particles, here you go. This is your velocity tab here. If it's closed up like that, open it up, obviously. And let's play a little bit with the normal. Now the normal is the particles are being emitted from the normal line. So let's make this 0.15. Okay, and you can see a small adjustment to the geometry of the emission. It's just subtle. Randomness, I like to turn the random up a little bit. Actually, I was pretty happy with this setting. Now, as far as randomness, this is the different speed of the particles. So some are going fast, some are going slow. So if you find that that's a bit too much, feel free to adjust it. You can also push on the Z a little bit. So if you push on the Z, I'll show you the effect. If you push on the Z, now let's move this up in the air. There we go. You'll see that this just became a lot taller because we're sort of giving it a little push. And this is the Z axis. If you look down here, you will see that that direction is Z. Okay, so not too much of a push. I was actually quite subtle. There we go. And there, yeah, the particles are emitting quite steadily. So I'm going to make that I'm just going to do a subtle push on the Z, not too much. Okay. Given a degree of randomness, I've given a little push, and a little bit of damping is kind of important. Damping is sort of gives it doesn't have free reign. So a little inertia, a little sort of a bit of a grounding force, if you will. I don't want it to expand too fast. So 0.135. And once there we go. A little bit of dampening brings the particles a little closer together because I am trying to make fire. Okay. So we've adjusted the gravity. We've got things falling up. And now when we test the animation, now you can test the animation by going here and click. You can click animate. Right? And you can zoom in on this and you can see it's doing a pretty good job. Right? You can also see what is emitting. And that's not such a big deal in this tutorial because we're going to hide that inside the brazier. So have a little bit of fun with this. The particles themselves, though, can't remain white. So in Blender, you can give a color to something. So we have to go to the Materials tab and add a new material to the plane. And these are arguments here. So right now, we don't want it to really be just a white material. Right? We can adjust this. I'm going to adjust the color because I want it to be like fire. I want it to be red. So we'll just set the RGB values like that. If you want to use hex or HSV, up to you, but I'm okay with RGB. And now when we go here and we render the animation, oops, I don't think it took, specular. Just a second. There we go. I'd adjusted the wrong one. I was hurrying too much. Okay, so we'll adjust this upper slider to do the red color. Now, what we should see, just a second here. There we go. There's our blazing red particles. So it doesn't really look like fire, but it's getting there. It's spreading out. Now, right now it's 1,000 particles, but I've gone as high as 2. So I'm actually going to set that now to 2,000 particles. And when I animate that, let's see what we have. You can see that you have much more. You're not seeing the sort of particle graininess. So it's pretty neat looking. So I'm going to leave that around 2,000 for now. Okay. So on frame 1, ensure that you're on frame 1. Look down here in La La Land. And there's frame 1. Oh, sorry about that. And on frame number 1, we're going to set our alpha levels or transparency on this to make sure that it's not too strong of an effect. So I want those particles to be a little bit see-through. So let's turn on transparency. Okay. And we'll choose ray trace transparency. And here's our alpha level. Our alpha level is going to be set to 0.70. Okay. So we can see through it just a little bit. Okay. So alpha level looks pretty good. And make sure that this is set to halo. It was set to surface right now, where it's right now. You can sort of see how you're seeing through that, but really what we want to do is change that from surface to halo. There we go. And our alpha level is 0.7, just like we wanted it to be. And when we render this, always rendering, it'll make it a little bit more transparent. There's a lot of particles here, mind you. Escape to get out of that. So go back there. The alpha level's here. So let's adjust our arguments a little bit. And our halo size, I'm going to set to 0.6. And I'm going to set the add, a little bit of ramp it up a little bit internally to 0.7. Or you can just say 0.7 like that. And you have your values kind of in place, more or less. So it's looking pretty good. Here's a point of note. The particles are going to glow in this fashion. We want to add a filter over top of these. We're going to use think of it as a layer to go over top of this. And we need to say that we're going to texturize this. This will become important in just a few seconds because our next operation will be to give this a bit of a yellow tinge because it's just projecting red. Okay, so when we go to add a texture, we've already added a material. And I always tell my students, remember, you have to add a material and then you can add textures. So texture is up here, right there. And these tooltips are important. You should read them. They do give you an indication of what all these things do. So not a bad idea to pay attention to them. So our default texture, I guess the last time I was playing around with image or movie, but in this case, what makes a really good filter is to apply a cloud filter. And you could see this here, how it's kind of something we're going to see through, a bit like a mask or a filter, if you will. Now, when you go to apply this here, you have to decide how close you want this cloudiness together. So I like a setting of 0.650, which spreads it out quite a bit. Another thing and I don't know why it's always in place, but when you choose a texture, you'll get this color. So let me show you what that looks like on render. Because we have a purple filter over top, this is turned purple, and it's very annoying. So hit escape, don't waste your time. And what we want for this to be believable fire is to click on this, and let's set this to yellow. So pick your favorite yellow. Something in that range. There we go. And good, we have that in place. And there's a couple other presets that I want to get to here. I want this filter to be a little bit stretched on the y-axis so that it just looks a little thinner. So you can turn this down to 0.3, like that, which will spread it out a little bit, sort of in a streaky fashion, so we see a little bit more of the internals. And it's pretty intense here. We're going to have to make sure that this filter isn't completely opaque. 1.0 is opaque, like you can't see through it. So playing around, I've been pretty happy with a 0.5 for the alpha, so half transparent. And the color intensity, 0.6. A little bit happier with those kind of arguments. So these settings look pretty good. Now let's take another quick render, see what we have. So there we have, it's a little bit more believable, but you could argue way too many particles, right? But it is kind of giving you a fire effect right now. It's not bad. It's a little crude, but not bad to begin with. What we need to do with the fire, the way fire works is, well, the way fire works, as the fuel burns up, the particle will flare, and then as it dies, it'll become more transparent. So these particles going up should be becoming more transparent. They shouldn't stay at the same sort of transparency level the whole time. So one thing you can do in this software is you can do keyframing. And anybody who ever did Flash knows about keyframing, where you go to one frame and say you want something to look one way, and you go to another frame and you tell it you want it to look another way. So right now, bless my soul, I'm on frame number 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply what's called an alpha keyframe. And for the longest time, I was terrible at this because I got very used to an older version of Blender. So what do I mean by that? What it means is I'll go here, okay? And this red material has a 0.7 alpha. So I can say on frame number 1, you hover over top of this button right here. So I'm going to zoom in because that's annoying. It's fun though. And you hit on your keyboard, this is my favorite, you hit the letter I. Now you'll see it change color. So what you've done is you've inserted a keyframe, and because you were over top of the halo, it knows you want the first frame in the movie to be 0.7. Now it's waiting for the rest of the story. It doesn't know what the end point is. So go to frame 100. Oops, not 99. Let's be sure. Let's go to frame 100. So confirmed frame 100 down here, right? Definitely 100. And the alpha level on frame 100 still doesn't know of a change. So we're going to slide this all the way down to the point where it's pretty well gone. Just a slight, maybe it's just a bit there. I like to leave just a tiny bit. Hover over top and then take your fingers off the mouse, obviously, and on your keyboard hit I, and you'll see it goes yellow. Okay, so what it's done is we have a fade effect. So if you keep your eye on this over here in particular, what you'll see, and I'll just manually drag this, is you'll see that the alpha level is decreasing. So it has keyframed it until we get to frame 100 where it looks like it's gone. Okay, so you can also use these controls. Seems I don't very often. What does that look like? Okay, well, endless rendering. Here we go. So as we go through it, you'll start to see the fire itself is becoming a little more transparent. The particles up here are dying a little bit more frequently, and it's going to look like my fire is going out because it's losing its transparency. Okay, there's frame 100. Nice, looks pretty good. So we've got a little bit more to do, but it's starting to look pretty good. At this point, let's make sure that our movie is set up I keep going to this rendering button and clicking on animation, or if you hit render, this is like hitting F12. I just want to see what it looks like. Tells you details about your movie, start end frames, 25 frames per second. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. Now, when you make a movie, right, you have to think about your output. So let's zoom out a little bit. Down here, our output is the temp folder. That's a terrible location. So for purposes of this illustration, I got to show you, if you don't choose a different output, first of all, this is making I've made JPEGs and PNG picture file flip movies. Well, that's not going to work. So I want to make a movie, all right, but I want to choose a different location. So I'm going to choose desktop. Okay, that's fine. But you need to make the next change, and it's vital, okay? You don't want this to be a flip movie where it's just a bunch of pictures, JPEGs being shown in a row. So I'll choose the H.264 format, good format. And now that's a picture frame movie. Okay, so what's going to go on my desktop is going to be a movie. Okay, that's a good idea. So this time when it renders, I won't fill up my temp folder with tons of pictures, and there'll be an animation on my desktop. So at this point, probably best to go and hit save as, and I don't know, let's go to desktop. We'll call it Stubby Vase. Nah, let's call it Fire Making _1. Now, just because I hit enter on the keyboard doesn't mean it saved it. That means I accepted the name. That saved it. You've got to hit save as Blender file. Okay, so it's looking like we're getting a lot further sort of into our settings. I'm just going to review a few to make sure I have them all in place. There we go. That's looking pretty good. Not bad. All right. Just wanted to be sure. And kind of go into the last little bit here. Messing around with our fire settings in your particle settings, you could take a look at 2000. You might want to try it with as little as 1500. Some people like 1000, right? And you can see my particles have adjusted. What I really want to do right now is to adjust this so that this is, well, let's go to the top view by hitting 7. I want to put this in the cauldron because this is supposed to be fire. So let's lower this down a little bit like this. Okay, let's go to the 0 view. This is what your camera is seeing. So let's grab that and bring that down a little bit. Okay, hit F12. Okay, that's not bad. So it's glowing quite nicely. You might want to, I don't know about adjusting the size of my fire. I'm thinking I might adjust the size of my vase a little bit more. So let's go to 7. Hit scale, S for scale, and bring it in a little bit. And let's render F12. Yeah, looks pretty good. The universe kind of looks a little goofy. I've got this blue universe. So when you click on your world tab right here, what you see is you've got a preview of exactly what your settings are. So let's make the horizon dark because I want to see the fire quite well. Zoom out on that. And let's see when we hit F12 now. Ooh, that's pretty good. We're a little close, so maybe we'll back the camera up just a little bit. These are just little finicky things. Let's back it up a little bit. Hit 0, get an idea. I do like kind of working with this. It's not bad. F12 render. It looks not bad. It gives a little bit of height, right? So now what I want to do is I'm going to do a full render. So I'm going to pause. I'll pause the video and take a look at kind of what our finished result is, and then come back in just a moment. So I'm just going to pause the recording. See you in 2 shakes. Okay, and we're back. It wasn't a particularly long render. It was just a 100 frame movie. So I'm going to minimize, go onto my super messy desktop, where I set the file. So there we go. So our file is right here. It's this AVI. And I will save the time that it would take for a QuickTime conversion. I'll open it with our friend VLC. There we go. And let's go full screen on VLC. And we lost it, so we'll have to start that again. There we go. So there's our fire. Looks pretty good. So short, I have to run it one more time. All that work. There we go. Pretty neat effect. So that's Blender Fire, just sort of a quick tutorial. I invite you to mess around with the settings, number of particles, the normals, any of the settings that I've attached to the handout to give you a chance to mess around with it. Now, this is additionally done by Walker Creations. It was done way back for Blender 2.4. My students always loved it so much, they said, hey, could you redo the animation for Blender 2.6? I said, sure. But it's interesting because if you've been following Blender, you know that there is built-in smoke and digital fire as quick effects. However, it's a lot more fun to kind of rock it old school and show you how these particle systems work. Okay, so I've been meaning to get this tutorial out of the way for a while. Hope you enjoyed it, and ciao. Have a good one.